The standard way in Bootstrap of creating a responsive grid is to use rows and columns. The grid is said to be responsive because the layout depends on how wide the screen is. Before getting started, a little explanation would be quite helpful here. The terms row and column are a bit misleading in this case because it would suggest that the number of columns in the grid is static and the rows and columns are equal and equivalent. This is actually not the case, and it can be a little confusing to think of things in terms of rows and column. In fact, you can think of a row more like a box, and you can think of a column more like an item which is arranged within that box. So a row is like a box containing a number of items. Each item has a certain width and prefers to be arranged horizontally from left to right. As long as there is enough space, all of these items will be arranged in a single line. If there is not enough space, any later items will be dumped down to the next line. So for example, if you have a box containing an item which has a width of 25% of the page, it would easily fit. In fact, you could fit 4 of such items and they would all be arranged in a single line. But if we were to add a 5th item, there would not be enough space in the line, so that item would need to be bumped down to the next line. In the Bootstrap framework, the developer can pick how wide each item is depending on the width of the screen. So for example, the developer might set the width of each column to 100% for small screens, to 33% for medium-sized screens, and to 25% for large and extra large screens. That means only 1 would fit per line in small screens, 3 items would fit side by side in medium-sized screens, and 4 would fit side by side in extra large screens. Next, let's create a simple example to make the explanation a little more intuitive and a little less abstract. In this example, we will use rows and columns to create a simple responsive grid on the About Me page. By the way, this video is part of a larger course about Bootstrap Studio. You can find the full course on Udemy or Skillshare. Check out the link in the description. First, let's go to the page and drag a row onto the canvas. Next, let's add 3 columns to the row. We can see that the 3 columns are arranged next to each other. When we expect the generated HTML, we see that the rows and the columns are simple divs, but with the class attributes row and col added. Select the first column. Under options, you can set the width of the column. Setting the width to 1 sets the width to 1/12 of the available width. This leaves more space for the other 2 columns, and they will expand. Setting the width to 12 sets the width to 100% of the available width. This pushes the other 2 columns down. Setting the width to 6 sets the available width to 50%. This leaves much less for the other 2 columns. Incidentally, it's quite interesting to see how changing the width of the column affects the HTML code. Next, let's set the width for different screen sizes. First, set the column width back to none. When we expand these options, we see that we can set the column width for different screen sizes. For small screen sizes, let's set the width of each column to 12. This means each column will take up 100% of the available space. For medium-sized screens, we would like to arrange the first 2 columns side by side, and we would like to push the 3rd column down. So let's set the width to 6, 6, and 12 respectively. And finally, for large and extra large screens, we would like the 3 columns arranged next to each other, but we would like the width of the 3rd column to be wider than the width of the first 2. So let's set the width to 3, 3, and 6 respectively. So now we have a basic responsive grid, which has a different layout depending on what device you're on. Next, let's add some content and styling. Let's start by adding a heading and a paragraph to each column. Next, let's add a border to each column. You can hold down the Control button to select multiple elements at the same time. As you can see, the columns are so close together that they're touching. We could add some space between them by increasing the margin, but this causes a problem. The extra space taken up by the margins pushes the second column to the next line, and this messes up the layout that we intended. A better solution would be to group the content of the column into a div. And add a border to the div instead. This way, we can easily change the margin without worrying about messing up the layout. We would also like to add some space between the edges of the page and the content of the columns. A straightforward way to achieve this is by using a container. A container is a very useful element. It is a simple div element with special properties. The container is always centered in the middle of the page. Let's drag and drop a container into the body, and then simply drag and drop the row into the container. Finally, let's adjust each column to add the finishing touches. First, I'm going to add some padding to each div. And I will set up a border radius of 20 pixels. After all, I think I will remove the border from these divs and rather change the background color instead. I will add a profile picture to the first column instead of the text. I will edit the text in the columns. You can press Shift-Enter to add a new line within a paragraph element. Finally, I will set the height of each div manually to make sure that the height stays the same for each column. And that's how to make a basic responsive grid using rows and columns in Bootstrap. Next, I will do another example in which I create a footer like this. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, why not support this channel by liking and subscribing? You can also check out my website for more free stuff. So long for now, see you in the next video. Bye bye.